Well, welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed the show. And for those of you who have just dialed in, we are talking about the anatomy of a trial. And we're talking about the various interesting components that make up a trial. In our previous show, we talked about opening statements or jury selection, opening statements, and examinations. Today, we've been talking about the cross-examination. And we're now going to talk a little bit about that closing statement and also jury deliberation. With us, we have a very distinguished and privileged to have a very expert panel. We have a retired judge who has presided over well over 100 cases. We have one of the nation's experts on jury deliberation, and that is Judge Schiffman. And we have one of the nation's most renowned experts on jury deliberation, and that's Professor Martyr, but I'll call her Nancy. And we have a real live trial lawyer with us who's actually tried both criminal and civil cases, and that's Marty Dolan. So let's get back, let's go on to our next topic, which is the closing statement. And I think I'll start with the trial lawyer and ask the question, closings in films and on TV are often built up as the deciding factor on which the case rests. What is the truth about that?
Well, I think the truth is, if you talk to most trial lawyers, the most important part of a case is jury selection and opening statement, and then the consistency of presentation along the way. I mean, you promise a jury you're going to do something in the beginning, and the closing is important in that you better have done what you told them you're going to do. Otherwise, you're going to lose credibility. So it is the trial lawyer's opportunity to wrap things up, to make that final connection, to give them what they were told they were going to get. Jurors, as I said earlier, are good, and they want to do good. They want to do the right thing. And the good trial lawyers, and the ones that mentored me, is that you taught me that you have to empower the jury to make that decision. You give them that power, because when they go back in the deliberation room, they are the most powerful people in the room. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not the witnesses, but the jury. And it's a great thing.
Nancy, we'll jump ahead a little bit, but we're going to talk a lot more about this in a few minutes. How good are juries at picking apart the facts and matching them up and determining if they really add up?
I think they're really good, and studies support that view. The idea that you have 12 people in most criminal cases pooling together their knowledge, their information, their recollections, I think makes them a very good decision maker in terms of the facts.
And Judge, have you seen a closing argument that just turned it around on behalf of the lawyer who presented it?
I have seen an occasional closing argument where that happens. I think, though, Marty is correct. By and large, by the time you get the closing argument, the juror, I think the die has often been cast. Interestingly enough, you know, our dramatic closing arguments are often very brief. They only last 2 or 3 minutes. Most closing arguments in real trials last a lot longer, because there's a lot of things lawyers have to do. They have to explain jury instructions, they have to explain the law, and they have to explain how all those things mesh together. A lot of it is very, I want to say, technical, and a lot of it is just reminding jurors about everything else that has happened and how now it all fits together in that final conclusion.
I mean, there's in the movie The Verdict, I refer to sometimes as a nice closing argument, in that I think it's made very clear in that movie that trials are imperfect, lawyers are not perfect, but in that movie, Paul Newman empowered the jury to go make the right decision. And that's what you really want to do.
Right. Nancy, let's talk about what happens in that closed room, the jury deliberation process. What does the movie, and if you haven't seen this, you've got to go and check out 12 Angry Men. But what does that movie, which is almost a seminal movie, the movie that gets all the conversation around jury deliberation started, what does that teach us about jury deliberation?
Well, it teaches us, first of all, that jurors don't enter the room knowing what to do. It takes them a while to figure out that they need to talk about the evidence. They need to pull together their recollections. They need to work together. They need to discover biases that they might have that need to be exposed, that might shape their views. So the movie teaches a lot about deliberations and about sometimes how difficult those deliberations can be.
How realistic is 12 Angry Men in depicting jury deliberations, and what about it is unrealistic?
Well, one realistic thing is how difficult reaching judgment can be. And it's not an easy thing. It's not necessarily an easy process. And sometimes there can be difficulties among the jurors, and it's hard to reach consensus. So I think it's very effective at explaining that. In terms of what's unrealistic, certainly one thing that is unrealistic is how one juror can turn around the other 11 jurors. That does happen from time to time, but not very often.
And Judge, what's the role of the judge in getting that jury ready to go back to deliberate?
Well, the judge is kind of the maestro of the trial. You know, the judge conducts everything, and the judge will instruct the jury, tell the jury what the law is. But as Nancy's pointed out, one of the interesting things is we really don't tell jurors what to do when they get into that room. And for example, you know, we don't even tell them how to select a foreman or a foreperson for the jury. In many states, the first person selected in the jury is the foreman. We don't even tell them how to do that. The judge can, moves them along, and then oftentimes the judge has an important role at the end of the trial when the jurors start asking questions. They'll come out with questions. They'll want to hear testimony repeated. They'll ask for clarification on instructions. And the judge's role is to help them to, with the aid of the lawyers, to make sure that they come to a verdict.
Nancy, talk a little bit more about the foreman or foreperson. It seems to me insane that there is not at least some process, but maybe you can explain why there isn't a process of how a foreman gets selected.
Well, as the judge mentioned, it really varies. Sometimes it's the first juror who's seated in the jury box. Other times we leave it up to the jurors to decide for themselves. And social science research tells us that if you want to become the foreperson of the jury, you either need to ask the question, who wants to be the foreperson? Or if it's a rectangular table, you need to sit at one of the ends and you'll be seen as the foreperson and you'll become the foreperson.
But what's that person's role throughout the process?
Again, that can really vary, and it depends on the jury and on the personality of the foreperson. The foreperson can be an administrator, just somebody who passes out the pieces of paper for voting, or the foreperson can shape the dynamics, the tone of the jury deliberation, or the foreperson can dominate the proceedings and try and urge his or her point of view. So the role can really vary depending on the person filling that role.
Marty, how good are you, or what's your record at predicting what a jury's verdict is going to be?
Well, I mean, it's funny you asked that question, but we, even to the minute the jury's called out, never ever predict what they're going to do, because every time I've tried that, it's
never right. Never
so
right. Never right.
I've always told people, and I tell clients that come in, good lawyers tell their clients to come in, they say, how good is my case? I've been told I have a perfect case, there's no way I'm going to lose. A jury is 50-50, and if you look at the stats, every week in our law reports, down the line it's basically 50-50 on what they do. And you never can predict what a jury's going to do.
It's a very difficult, job, and it's even sometimes watching trials, and when the jury comes back, I've had occasions when I've said to myself, did they hear the same evidence I heard? It's very hard to predict. But then they'll talk to you and they'll tell you and they'll give you an explanation that often makes a lot of sense.
Why is it so difficult for a juror to be a holdout juror?
Well, the holdout juror...
And what is a holdout juror?
A holdout juror is somebody who is disagreeing with the rest of the jury, who sees the case differently, votes differently, and believes that the rest of the jury has made a mistake and is trying to convince the other 11 jurors to vote a different way. But that's a very hard position to be in. It's much easier if there are few jurors in that position, say 3 or 4. But if there are only 1 or 2, it's very hard to withstand that group pressure and not go along with the others.
And Judge, why is secrecy so important for jury deliberations?
Well, that's a very good question, and I assume it's because we don't want, if we allow information to come out of that room, there's always the possibility that somebody will try to influence that group. You know, if you hear somebody say they're 11-1 for guilty or 11-1 for not guilty, then somebody might very quickly try to eliminate that one person. Say, well, you know, if you don't vote for guilty, you're going to have to spend the night in a hotel, or you're not going to, or something's going to happen. And you don't want to influence them at all. A judge is not even supposed to ask the jury how they're divided. If they come out and say, we're divided and we're having trouble reaching a verdict, the judge is not supposed to say, well, what's the division? You know, is it 11-1, 10-2, 9-3? Not supposed to do that.
If I gave you 15 seconds each to tell me what's the one thing you want to debunk about what really happens in a trial versus what you see on TV, Marty, what would you say at 15 seconds?
Well, number one is the law is not fast like it is on TV. Something doesn't happen and then there's a trial in a month. It's not fast, and people have to understand that. But secondly, just real quick, is that the jury system in America is the greatest system in the entire world. And we tell jurors that all the time. And if they respect the process, they will get everything out of that process.
Nancy, in 10 seconds.
The image that you see of the passive jury does not accurately describe the jury. The jury has a much more active role to play, and you see that in the movie 12 Angry Men, deliberations.
Judge,
most trials take less than a day to finish. Jurors think they're going to be in jury duty for months and months and months. Most cases are done in less than a day.
well, there you have it. I'm sure you've learned some things, maybe surprised you in some ways, but that's our job here at the Illinois State Bar Association. We want to bring useful and good information to help you better understand the legal process. And I thank our panelists today for exactly doing that. So thank you very much. We appreciate your contributions. It's been a great show.